You may not be ready to let your guard down, and that's completely understandable. I truthfully and sincerely hope that with time, you'll come to forgive us, even if we don't deserve it.
Dib.
The said 13-year-old jerked in his seat, startled by the sound of his own name, having been tuned into his thoughts in the silence in his bedroom, staring at the screen of his computer like he had been frequently doing for the past 10 months. He was not frantically doing research, nor watching any evil aliens through any spy cameras. He watched the moon on his outer space-themed screensaver drift across the monitor 1 pixel at a time, and without absently talking to himself. He had grown out of that habit. His younger sibling took this dramatic change quite seriously. She had been exercising kindness in her voice, but the darkness in it would always be present.
Fudio made breakfast calzones,
she said. Dib twisted his chair around, with one lazy elbow still on his desk. Right in the middle of his doorway stood Gaz. She took a moment to observe Dib's expression, then cocked her head suspiciously.
What's the matter with you? You've been quiet and sad for months, but it looks like something else just happened.
Dib didn't think his eyes looked any less glazed than any other morning, but Gaz knew him so well that even tiny details as such were obvious to her. Dib found himself mildly touched by her every reaction. The ill-tempered Gaz could easily sense when Dib was at his lowest point, and when it was time to lend a generous amount of her support.
You used to tell me everything,
she said.
Everything? Is this because Dad still doesn't admit what happened? Even though everyone saw what happened, the Earth is still split apart, this town alone still needs cleaning up, and that clone of Dad lived with us until he left to go fulfill his dream to open a pudding shop? Did you just finally give up?
The hint of helplessness in her tone gave Dib the modicum of motivation he needed to say what he was thinking. He sighed, shrugged, and shook his head. At first, I was only after the things people didn't believe in because I wanted them to start believing. I wanted them to see that I could see. Then when Zim came, it was all about him. The insults, the chasing around, the humiliating each other, tricking each other, and trying to literally kill each other sometimes. The thrill from these battles and adventures with this annoying alien pest, it changed my life.
You haven't talked about Zim in forever,
Gaz commented. Dib guiltily looked out of his window. You know, the first time he stopped fighting, the idea of winning still felt good. But then after we saved the world from the Florpus, he gave up again because his leaders got fed up with him and told him off. That's why his crazy robot was upset when it stayed with us that one day.
So that's why his house is all beat up and empty. Well, why are you all depressed? Your work is done. You can move on to the next weird chapter in your life.
He tried to kill himself, Gaz. As Dib earnestly said this, he met the eyes of the one he spoke to. They widened in consternation. As Gaz perceived the gravity of this conversation, she stared at Dib's grave expression, then at nothing, wincing with one eye.
Oh.
Dib too looked away, shaking his head. I couldn't feel good. It was one thing to watch him rolling around on the floor bawling, but you could just tell. He was so lost. I mean, that's what I wanted all this time, but not like this. It was just so wrong. And Zita, my classmate, she knew who he was finally, but she cared just as much as you did. And she still treated him like he was human. She also still thinks I'm crazy. And I know why. And I am.
Where is Zim?
He's been busy taking care of some personal things. In space. And from what I've been overhearing through the thing, it's final. We really don't have to worry about Zim anymore.
So what, you miss him?
Gaz's tone was unclear, but she didn't ask her question derisively. Dib reticently scratched his head, behind the signature tuft of hair that always stuck out like his father's. That's just weird, but he sighed. It would just be nice to hear something from him again. If I don't, it's going to bug me for the rest of my life. Gaz crossed her arms, leaned against the doorframe, and looked up.
If we don't, we should go.
Dib curiously raised an eyebrow at her, unsure of what she meant.
You know, in space.
Gaz explained. She shrugged.
I wouldn't mind going on another space road trip with my brother to see it all and to see what Zim is up to.
Gaz's offer and the sincerity in it inspired Dib to smile. That's a good idea. Gaz turned around to leave and chortled through her nose.
It's a good idea as long as we keep clear of those whales.
Fondly and sadly, Dib thought about that moment with Gaz. She had been willing to go on adventures with him in the past, but this was the most open about it she had ever been. Dib worried that after 3 years, she had lost the spirit or forgotten. He spent most of his free time trying to once again get Tak's ship running, though with the ship having a mind of its own and a stubborn hatred for Dib, fixing it may have already been for nothing. He was lucky to convince it to fly him and Gaz to Mu Ping 10 to rescue their father and save the Earth, which in turn spited Zim, the ship's motive to work with Dib in the first place, as, like Tak herself, it despised Zim, and even more than it did Dib. But Dib lowered his head into his hands when he realized for a 92nd time that it wasn't likely that the ship would give in this time, when all Dib wanted to do this time was see Zim, a situation not as dire or exciting, as it was still programmed by Tak's downloaded personality for security reasons. Surely the ship would turn down the request in one heartbeat, and maybe crush Dib in the process. He would have tried updating it with his own personality, but that too had caused problems after the one time he did try. Another option would be to ask his father for help. Dib leaned back and scoffed hopelessly.
Freshman!
A splash of prune juice to the face welcomed him back from his musings. With a scowl, he scrubbed away at it with the pile of paper towels he already had prepared for himself, not bothering to spare a glance to the one responsible. He was already gone anyway. Sometimes one word was all they had to say. This insult was at least unrelated to his reputation of being crazy, and was said to him by a random student in a higher grade than him, therefore did not feel as personal.
Craig!
Something solid struck him this time, after a different, this time familiar voice cheered. Dib furrowed his brow at the half-eaten slice of watermelon hitting the cafeteria floor with a splat, then picked up his tray of food to move to a more secluded area. After his first 3 steps, however, he was face to face with 4 other childhood classmates.
Hey, you want my beans? Because I don't like beans.
One of them drawled. He shrank back dramatically.
Oh, uh-oh. That's not human to you, is it?
With a glare and a cynical grin, he leaned in close, causing Dib to step back in the opposite direction.
Am I going to be your new alien, Dib? I know you're probably looking for one. Are you going to push me around until I crack? Huh? That'll be fun, don't you think?
Right, that's enough. Another familiar voice interjected, this time from behind Dib. Judging by what it said, Dib had the sense that he had less to worry about this time. He would have looked, but he knew, from 16 years of experience, not to turn his back on those asking for trouble. The group was puzzled with the mauve-haired girl coming to confront them. They remembered her as one of the children that enjoyed putting Dib in his place, once deliberately having him sent to the crazy house. Yet they also remembered her as the voice of reason, and the one Miss Bitters tolerated if not favored the most. Students also came to respect her for being bold and sensible, in a way that was almost attractive to some. So, the group meekly left as soon as she slammed her own lunch tray down on the table in front of her and snapped,
Beat it, assholes.
Then with a casual sniff, the girl blinked away her stern expression, sat down, and fidgeted with her spork before using it to take the first 2 bites of her ravioli, all without looking at Dib, who slowly sat down as well.
Hi, Sita.
Why did you do that?
Because that's enough. The picking on you got old a long time ago, honestly.
Dib was relieved that someone finally said this, even though Zita still wasn't exactly a fan of him. He rested an elbow on the table, cheek in hand. They're never going to let me live that down.
How can we forget the Dib and Zim war? It's a classic,
Zita said. You weren't much help, Dib mumbled. Zita finally looked at him, glaring with one eye.
What?
Dib threw open the hand he had his face in, gesturing the injustice in what he was bringing up.
You told everybody that Zim tried to kill himself, and I've been getting accused of being the one who drove him to it. I told 2 people.
Zita replied, sincerely and defensively.
They were giggling and flinging corn at him during lunch. Come on. They had to know they were picking on a guy who tried to commit suicide a few days before then. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it.
Well, I deserve it anyway, Dib quietly said, suddenly looking penitent to Zita's awe. Maybe I was part of the reason, who knows? I wonder how bad it would have been if our timing wasn't perfect. Zita stared down at her lunch with a somber, timorous smile.
I have nightmares about that, you know. Did I ever tell you that?
Dib tilted his head in interest. No. You barely talked to me at all since that day with Zim. You didn't call me crazy as often anymore. I thought you hated me.
I did,
Zita said bluntly.
Mostly I didn't feel like talking because it felt weirder. All interacting with you does is remind me that we both saw the guy that sat in front of me at school almost die. We both had to save him. It just felt weird being around you after that, in a new way. But I'm starting to get over it.
Dib stared at his own lunch. Unlike Zita, he hadn't touched any of it. We didn't both save him. I know I did a little bit of the talking and all, but you did the most important part.
That's what the bad dreams are about. In real life, I succeeded, but for some reason, in the dreams, I don't.
Zita grabbed her juice box, but didn't drink it. She almost looked as though she was boarding a roller coaster she already knew was too intense to handle. And, again, she avoided eye contact with Dib.
It still happens in the same creek. But the water isn't just belly deep, okay? It's deep. Like bottomless. So, you know, I have to swim this time. Dive all the way in. Hold my breath. There were a few times when it was pitch black and I almost couldn't find him. Almost? Yeah, I always do. I get him out of the water. But he never snaps out of it.
Dib cringed slightly. Zita waved her drink around in gesture as she continued.
I'm trying to get him to cough it up. I do the chest compressions. I turn him over, but I can't get anything from him.
Zita finally took a sip at her juice, then crossed her arms on the table.
One time I woke up yelling at him and I scared my cat. Her back foot caught my eye when she jumped off the bed. It hurt almost as much as the fucking mashed potatoes.
That's really messed up. I'm sorry, Zita.
It's okay. Remember when you sat there like a stupid kid because you barely knew what CPR even was yet? Because you were a stupid kid? Even though you knew a lot of big words and got awesome grades like you weren't stupid?
You shouldn't let that bother you, Zita. Seriously, I was the stupid one.
There was this one dream, though. The one time he did come back to life. But he still didn't have his peck. He still died. I still didn't get the happy ending I wanted. And I think it's because there was no happy ending. For real.
Dib nodded, understanding. A random paper airplane landed in Zita's lunch tray, smearing it with ravioli. Without reacting, she picked it up and sent it back in the air, and Dib watched it fly across the cafeteria as Zita told him more.
Before he ran out of his packed juice, or whatever, he said something like, "It hurts so much. My insides feel like they're being poisoned, it hurts." And the dream gave me the sense that he meant emotionally. And it makes sense. Just because we talked him out of it doesn't really mean the feeling just, poof, went away just like that, right? You have to have a lot going on with you to be driven to suicide. Maybe that's also why the water is deep. He's drowning in his sorrows too, and it's 100 times harder to save him from that.
That's what I think the dreams are telling me. She narrowed her eyes.
It's pissing me off. How can we fix what they're trying to tell me when Zim isn't here? And what are you looking at?
She noticed Dib's sudden look of surprise. When she questioned it, Dib stammered. Zim's... Nothing.
If you say so.
Zita said, awkwardly trying to pass it off as another Dib thing she wouldn't understand. She was repelled by the reminder that she was speaking with him about a personal matter, and she felt guilty for it. She wanted to be more mature about this and stop judging. She exhaled deeply and forced herself to once again meet Dib's eyes.
Are things cool between us?
Dib wasn't expecting her to ask something like this. With a neutral yet spirited look, he replied, "Yeah, sure."
I'm sorry for being a bitch to you like everyone else. When we were kids.
They could sense that students were starting to stare.
But you were right, Dib said sadly. How could I have respect for myself and hate Zim when I was just like him? I actually said to my sister once that becoming the enemy was the answer. But when you said it your way, a little something in me went...
Zita wasn't listening anymore. Whatever drew her attention away from Dib had scared her out of her seat, her eyes wide with shock, then recognition, as they stared past Dib. Dib and Zita were not the center of attention like the both of them had presumed a minute ago. Dib was the very last one to make sense of why everyone had grown completely silent. The very last one to notice the alien in the room.
Holy shit!
Dib looked behind him, and almost instantly he jumped to his feet like Zita had, stuttering in alarm and disbelief at the unexpected sight his mind was no longer used to processing. He had not seen Zim in nearly 4 years, but all of a sudden, out of seemingly nowhere, here he was standing before him, just 7 feet away, sporting a toothy grin under 2 large, shiny ruby orbs that were his alien eyes. Everyone else's mildly alarmed reactions made even more sense now, having not seen Zim completely out of his disguise. Zim showed a gloved, outstretched hand as he loudly, yet formally, greeted the 2 humans closest to him.
Hello, Dib and Zita! Hello again.
At the moment, the said teenagers were stuck staring, stunned and mouths agape. They took the time to register the charmingly peculiar voice that was unmistakably Zim's, the feeling of nostalgia and bewilderment hindering their will to respond. Next, one of the several familiar ways he cried out, strongly and almost musically, gave everyone goosebumps, as well as the pose, his feet far apart as both fists rose above his head.
I come in peace!
He blinked his eyes back open and hiccuped, as if acknowledging some sort of mistake he made. Still standing up straight, he brought a hand to his chest, bowed his head, and politely started over, trying to match his demeanor with the meaning of his announcement.
I mean, I come in peace.
My God, man, you really did come back, Dib said in astonishment. He slowly approached Zim and almost smiled. This was not the reaction everyone was anticipating from Dib at all. Where was the outburst? The fury? The boasting about being right about Zim? The swear that he would capture him? Zim cocked his head and blinked at Dib questioningly.
Are you pleased or disappointed?
I'm not sure. Mixed feelings, but... Dib looked down for a moment, staring in space. He shook his head, and there came the smile in its full form. Actually, no. This is amazing. It's amazing seeing you again, Zim. I was actually hoping I'd get to see you again.
It is amazing,
Zita delightfully agreed. Dib glanced at Zim's antennae, then pointed carefully at an eye. You know you're missing your disguise, right?
Yes,
Zim simply said, with a neutral, unconcerned smile. You're not even going to try blending in anymore? Dib asked. In a wise manner, Zim shut his eyes, clicked his tongue, and once again bowed his head.
No. We need to stay true and open to the species we've threatened to better the chance of earning their trust and forgiveness. For peace, not deceit. There's no need for disguises anymore with our universal conquest discontinued forever.
But you can still get killed here, Dib said. Anxiously at first, Zim looked around the room, meeting the many eyes of the students engrossed in his appearance. He looked behind him, where a group of citizens that followed him stood, cameras in hand. Then he stood up straight again.
I know, but so far human fascination with me has been positive, not morbid, like yours, with your many drawings.
Dib grimaced, both defensively and guiltily. Hey, I was still kind of a kid. Wild imagination, come on.
When you think about it, Zim never really needed a disguise in the first place,
Zita said, also pointing. She looked at her other classmates.
Half the people in this town alone are more alien than he is.
Realizing how true this was, everyone exchanged glances and nodded. Zim pointed back.
Zita, your head hair doesn't resemble the back of a mutant hedgehog.
His intention was not to offend Zita, and she seemed to understand that. She was amused even. She touched the small ponytail on the back of her head.
No, it doesn't. I changed it.
Zim happily shut his eyes and smiled as he straightened his arms out in front of him and gave Zita 2 thumbs ups. After a second, he blinked one eye open for reassurance.
This is right. This is a display of support.
Zita nodded and returned the thumbs up with a wink. Zim lowered his arms back to his sides. Warmly and sadly, he stared up at Zita for a brief moment before signaling her to come close with a scooping motion of one finger. Confused, Zita drew close. It was strange to her that she had to move down to Zim's level, being several inches taller than she was 4 years ago. Zim had not grown, further proving that he was not human. Zim suddenly sprang to her and caught her in a deep embrace around her neck and shoulder. Zita's heart skipped a beat at this. She was stupefied once again.
Zim's overdue thanks to you,
Zim softly said behind her ear. Zita wouldn't forget this. Chortling, her grin returned, and her arms, which had been raised in the air, wrapped around the little alien she hoped to have no more nightmares about.
Wow.
Zim, Dib said in wonder. I didn't think you would come back being the huggy type. Or... actually, you're really different now. I'm guessing the pack re-encoding went well for everyone? Zim let go of Zita and locked his hands behind his back.
Not everyone,
he said seriously.
29 soldiers refused to comply with these dramatic changes that Sis devised. They are still hiding somewhere far out in space to this day.
Those poor fools. I would have expected you to be one of those soldiers, Dib said.
You were overzealous, yes, Zim admitted, but after my final call with the
Uncomfortably, he corrected himself.
With red and purple, I began to see how toxic that was. The fervent thirst for power.
He bowed his head again and summarized the history of his people, much to Dib's zealous interest.
A century and a half ago, that became one of our pack's basic components. The Urkin race suffered through some horrible events, so horrible that we came closer to extinction each time. Our tallest at that time, Marbog, feared that if we did not grow our strongest somehow, we would be wiped out by whatever or whoever crossed our path next. Almighty Tallest Marbog was who made us the way we've been. The way we've been born, the way we've been raised, the way we think. Those updates were, as Empress Sis puts it, parasites, viruses.
I thought your leaders were called the Tallest.
She didn't like that. Before her election, legally speaking, our old system still applied to the control brains. Even though she got us to realize that being valued by our height was stupid, Sis had to be elected the Tallest first before she could officially do something about it. Keeping Almighty Tallest would go against her message and what she was fighting for, so she had the title name changed to Empress.
Zim outstretched his arms and looked at his own palms.
Ever since she figured out how to safely downgrade our packs while still keeping us strong, I've been... The feeling is indescribable. It's just better.
He stretched his arms above his head, drawing in a deep breath. Zim looked to the one speaking. Dib was gripping his own wrist. He sounded as sorry as he looked. I seriously owe you an apology. Zim pricked up his antennae. The fighting, everything, Dib said, his voice wavering. Sure, I was protecting the world from you, but I didn't do it right. Not really. Zeta was right all along. While I was protecting the world, I wasn't being any better than you.
You even had your own evil laugh,
said someone from far behind him. Another one of his childhood classmates, Poonchi. Dib turned around, objecting in denial. Huh? Me? No, I didn't. Everyone nodded. Dib looked to the floor in shame and dismay, and slowly scratched his head. Jeez. How much of a psycho was I? Zim took a step forward.
I forgive you.
He humbly put a hand to his chest.
Forgive me, maybe, after I say, I'm sorry.
He let the hand fall in defeat.
It's still going to take time for you to believe all of what I'm saying, isn't it?
Dib raised his hands out reassuringly. No, Zim, it's not. I know firsthand how frustrating it is for the truth to fall on deaf ears.
Even though the only proof I have are my words?
Zim asked. No, I found my own proof after you left Earth.
What proof was that? Oh, did you hear Sis?
Yeah, with the same transmitter I used to hear you coming for the very first time. I made some adjustments to it. But, Zim, I heard everything that happened up there. A pair of dark magenta eyes widened. There was a momentary silence. I was listening in all this time, Dib resumed. I slept on my roof more than I did my own bed. I recorded as much as I could, too. I heard you... Zim squinted in embarrassment.
Oh.
You cried so much. It was kind of hard to listen. I know what you did to your leaders, and what they did to you before that. And to your... Hey, your robot! Dib looked from side to side, then back to Zim. How is he? Zim didn't respond right away, troubled by the many private moments Dib could have overheard. Dib added, I caught the part when Sis got him to turn back on, and when you and Sis were arguing with the other Urkins, but that's as far as I got before the signal got cut off by some other aliens talking about pirate monkeys. After that, it was hard to get you guys back. What was the name? Gur? Did he make it?
Sis did her best with them.
Zim answered. He smiled.
And it was the best.
Dib felt something hard, yet alive, shifting on top of his head, just when a figure suddenly blocked his eyesight completely and made him recoil and stutter in alarm. The color silver, accompanied by two round, bright blue lights.
What? You talking about monkeys? You have a silk monkey?
The face inches from his spoke, then merrily stuck its tongue out. It, as well as the enthusiastic, childlike voice, was Gur's. How long were you on my head? Dib exclaimed. Gur slid to the floor on his back and dramatically covered his eyes.
I hasn't had a silk monkey in so long.
Zeta eyed one of her friends, Shell, from across the room. Before Zeta defended Dib, she was planning to sit with Shell, who was too disgusted with Dib to follow her. Shell perked up an eyebrow at Zeta, then looked at what she had on her own lunch tray. Hesitantly, she approached the little robot and handed him the rest of her chocolate suck monkey. With a wide grin, Gur excitedly took it in both claws and guzzled it down through the straw. With his system never having been able to tolerate anything containing chocolate, he struggled to keep some of it from spewing back out from his throat. Even though this happened almost every time he had this beverage before, it was one of his most favorite things to look forward to on planet Earth. Zim warned just as his sir began to splutter and make a mess.
Hey, slow down, Gur. I still need to report your difficulties with that to Sis. Not that I think it's serious or anything, but I just don't want you to hurt yourself.
Wait, so the robots? Dib inquired. They're not still evil, are they?
The moral compasses of our Sir units were updated, just like our packs,
Zim assured.
Sis says Gur was tricky to fix, but she's positive that he's no longer in any pain. His childlike personality was what our very first Sirs were like, before the ways of the Urkin race became strict by order of Almighty Tallest Marbog.
As Gur continued to gulp down his first suck monkey in years, Zim placed a hand on his head.
Gur is a mixed model, since he was so hastily thrown together. His brains were mixed up as well. The brains of the first Sir model were overpowering everything else, yet he was still under the influence of the brains of the other few models. It would explain why I had to depend on luck when I gave him direct orders. Lots of times he would forget them, ignore them, react inappropriately to them, and other things.
He squinted and twiddled his fingers in a circle.
Sis was able to make the brains not so mixed up and funny. Gur still gets confused at times, but he is a lot better now. And what's most important to me is that he can express his smeat-like joy without it being ruined by the trash that was in his head.
Dib flinched and backed away. Isn't that, like, his trigger word?
Not anymore,
Zim said confidently.
Like I just said, he's better. Right, Gur?
His sir glowed red, but not for the reason Dib feared. Gur stood up and dropped the suck monkey as he saluted, and triumphantly cried out,
"Yes, sir!"
Dib relaxed. So what now then? Sis canceled your guys' mission. If you're not going to destroy stuff and take over planets, what's your plan now?
You didn't get Sis's other messages?
Zim asked in mild surprise. Dib shook his head. Zim asked, looking to Zeta and the others,
What about your television sets, your radios, cell phones, and all things communication?
Dib shook his head again, this time with everyone else. Zim crossed his arms with a pleased smirk.
Well, Dib monster, did you ever notice that I've successfully defended your planet more than I've successfully annihilated it?
Like from Tak? And those guys that almost threw the Earth into a star or something? Wait, so Dib incredulously blinked his eyes wide. You're going to be doing the opposite of what you were doing before? Zim looked at the red-orange sky through the cafeteria windows.
There are still threats out there, such as those rogue Urkins and meteorites, rat zombies, my energy-absorbing blob thing. Our mission now is to fight them all off when the time comes. It will be delicious.
Like suck monkeys and tacos,
Gur added.
Yes,
Zim murmured. Dib shook his head in amazement. I don't know what to say. That's so crazy. And incredible. Can I touch you? Zim whirled around in a reflexive defense stance, as the question was asked from right behind him by one of the people that had followed him all the way from the streets to the school. Dib darted in between them with his arms out in protest and as protection. You're not going to torture him on my watch. No vivisecting, no—
Oh god, no, of course not.
Another man said, in alarm and disturbance, as if it should have already been in mind that Dib's idea was wrong and absurd.
But this is an alien species. Think of all we could get from him.
Dib's stare hardened. I have. Believe me, I have. But we have to chill sometimes. Instead of constantly starving for all the answers all the time, you know. We should let the answers come to us, more gracefully, like just now. Zim will probably have more stories and things to tell later. He looked to the said alien. Won't you? Zim showed a hand, which passionately formed a fist.
Of course. Such things Zim will tell.
The group of citizens closed in, causing Zim to cower a little and involuntarily grit his teeth.
Tell us things now,
a woman exclaimed.
Maybe a few, please?
Zim's fear receded when he was certain that he was not in danger, that these questions weren't coming from menacing hunger. He grinned and stood up straight. Though he was no longer fighting for power, he still enjoyed attention and respect.
Okie dokie.
Instead of going straight home after school, Dib wandered. With his hands nestled in his jacket pockets, with his head high, he walked. Occasionally, he stopped to look at random buildings, stray animals rummaging through dumpsters, and then finally, when he reached it, Zim's house, or rather his base, and what was left of it. A window was broken, the front lawn was overgrown. The gnomes ceased to respond to intruders since Zim's disappearance, suggesting that he may have deactivated them in his other defenses. Dib gave the sight a sad and curious glare, wondering if Zim was back inside the base. He stood at the fence for 7 minutes straight, half expecting to overhear Zim's evil laughter or Gur's high-pitched squeals of hysteria. There was a sinking feeling within Dib every time he somehow found himself missing those days. Spying, waiting, listening, watching, obsessing. A trace of Dib's old crazy self was still there, and it disgusted him. He had a fervid interest in paranormal studies ever since he was a baby. He could not completely give it up. It was just impossible. He had already tried once to please his father, but he could only stand to be in denial for a few weeks. This time, it had been years. This withdrawal left him with a feeling so surreal and so empty. It felt like life itself was fake in a way Dib could not begin to grasp. Dib forced himself to move on from the very thing he lived for, out of guilt. Zim was not the only one he wanted to see torn apart in a lab, and Zim was the only otherworldly creature he came across that was a legitimate threat. Like Zim had pointed out earlier, Dib even doodled how he pictured the experiments would go, and in graphic detail no normal 5th grader would think about drawing, let alone for fun.
All you want in life is to take down monsters like Bigfoot, all for your selfish reasons and to bring pain upon those creatures. If you hate Zim, how do you love yourself? You're just like him.
The eye-opening words of Zeta. It wouldn't be harmful if I focused on the studies of the paranormal studies. Dib thought aloud, just as his younger self would. Just exploring and documenting, right? Without the creepy thoughts and not... Oh God. His voice became flat by his last words. He could not stand listening to himself. Dib continued down the sidewalk. He kept his incoming thoughts unsaid. Why wouldn't Zim be back in his house? Isn't he living here again? Or is it just a visit? I guess he doesn't want to come back to the house. It probably holds a lot of bad memories. Where is he, though? He probably would have known of Zim's whereabouts if he skipped the rest of school and followed him, but Dib restrained himself. Zim already had enough people crowding around him for answers. I hope they're giving him enough space, Dib said, without cringing at the sound of his own voice this time. He sounded like a better person this time. He took a deep breath and silently insisted that he was a better person. He was close to the park he could not look at the same way as before. Only 2 times after Zim's attempted suicide, Dib stood over the bridge and stared down at the water. The first time was right after Zim left behind the note reading he was leaving Earth. Dib had found that note stuck in his windowsill. After showing it to Zeta was when Dib had gone to the bridge to think. The second time was right after he overheard Zim's laments through the transmitter, when Zim described to the other Urkins his near-death experience. Dib stepped foot in the area, taking in its surroundings, holding his hand out to a falling red leaf, inhaling the scent of nearby water, then stopped. He squinted at a distant figure ahead of him. It stood where he had intended to be. Dib thought it was an appropriate time to idle at the little bridge again, but it appeared as though he had to wait his turn, unless this person did not mind company. Wait. Through the dark, Dib had more difficulty identifying this figure, but it was small and familiar. As soon as Dib stepped a few yards closer, he made it out to be Zim. Antennae, pack, invader's uniform and all. His back to Dib, his arms crossed and leaning on the railing of the bridge, his head low as he stared down at the water, just as Dib was in the mood to do. Except, Dib's thoughts differed from Zim's, didn't it? Dib was frozen on the spot, his stare locked, his pulse quickening. He wouldn't. He mouthed, "There's no way. Not again." Just because we talked him out of it doesn't really mean the feeling just poof, went away just like that, right? You have to have a lot going on with you to be driven to suicide. More of Zita's words. More recent ones. Ones from today. He's drowning in his sorrows too, and it's 100 times harder to save him from that. This was surprisingly crushing for Dib to remember, now that history was threatening to repeat itself. "He wouldn't," Dib whispered again. "He was so outgoing, he'd... For God's sake, Zim, you just hugged Zita for saving you the first time. This doesn't make any sense." It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense, he thought just as soon as he heard himself say that ignorant statement. Idiot, these things almost never make sense, and that's not what's most important. In preparation, Dib's feet shifted far apart, and his fists tightened. "You probably had a long day, Zim, and I will leave you alone," he calmly whispered, "just as long as I know it's safe to." Now Dib had to keep an eye on Zim for a different reason. This was ironic to Dib. "I won't do nothing this time," he whispered, "especially when it's just me out here. It's cold, I'll probably get hyperthermia, but I'll jump in after you if I have to. Just don't make me do it." Zim uncrossed his arms and pressed his hands against the railing, looking as though he was getting ready to climb over it. Dib immediately kicked into a running start, moving more swiftly than he was able when he was 12. 30 steps later, he called out, "Zim! Don't!" Zim's head turned to see Dib skidding to a halt at the base of the bridge. His face was blank, but for a moment showed acknowledgement.
Eh? Oh. Hello, Dib.
He turned his head back. "I hope you're not doing what I think you're doing," Dib said uncertainly, while in the process of realizing that Zim's movement had been a simple change in position. Zim blinked in thought and surprise. Dib thought he was offended, but really, Zim was intrigued all over again by how strongly the humans reacted when a line was crossed. When word got around the school that the green kid allergic to unpurified water attempted suicide by jumping in a river, the children eased their mockery, if not gave it up completely. They acknowledged him with solemn respect. Torgsmacky gave him supportive, firm pats on the back. Keeve handed Zim a note, silently of all things, and, with an expertly drawn Zim surrounded by clouds and a beautiful rainbow all on the bottom, the note read, "The eyeballs that you once ripped out of my sockets, they cried for you today. You're still a friend to me. Let me know when you want me to shower you with everlasting love and affection again. Anything I can do to help. Please, love, Keith." And now, Dib had been preparing to save Zim just as Zita had.
Oh, no. Not this time,
Zim said.
"I wouldn't be able to do it again if I wanted to, anyway. After my first experience."
Are you sure?" Dib asked, dubious. To imply that he wasn't after all, Zim failed to reply. Dib stepped foot onto the bridge, slowly approaching with his hand out. "Are you still... Zim, you..." Zim looked at a tree standing from afar. Gur was playing with 2 raccoons, the 3 of them leaping from branch to branch. When Zim was sure the robot was truly occupied, he spoke again.
"I do still think about dying sometimes."
That's what Zita was worried about. Dib cringed in pity. There were aliens. There were ghosts. Maybe there were flying pigs, but there was no such thing as a happily ever after. Happy times, but no happy endings. The world would keep spinning. Life itself was the biggest mystery of all, and it would keep going. A happy-go-lucky child could be gobbling down his cereal one sunny spring morning, and down the street, meanwhile, another child is trying to cope with the untimely death of his mother. Every second of the day, there was suffering. Ignored, missed, or hidden, there was suffering everywhere. Unfathomable suffering. and Dib no longer had the heart to spread it.
Only my evil is gone. Nothing else.
Zim said. Dib could tell Zim's pain was beginning to inflame. Did you always feel like this?
No. Yes. Well,
Zim swallowed and continued to solemnly look ahead.
when I was young, the destruction I caused struck me as a gift. I see the chaos I leave behind and I think, what other smeet my age could do it like this on their own? Who did this thing was one little Urkin named Zim, and I am Zim. Who I was felt right in a way no one else wanted to understand. I knew, though. I knew what was going on around me. Deep inside the pack was my shame, but I always kept it trapped. My pride was true and strong, but was still penetrable. I knew that if I thought too much about it, and if I forgot to keep talking about how amazing I was, if I went a day without yelling out who I was as fervently as I could, the shame would do something to me that was irreversible and scary, like this.
Dib's eyes were wide with dismay and penitence. That's what that really meant? All this time? Zim held up a fist and weakly sang with almost no effort or enthusiasm, "I am Zim!" He then groaned and let his arm droop lazily over the railing.
It doesn't work anymore.
Oh, that's... Zim, I had no idea.
I'm sorry.
Huh?
I asked for your forgiveness, but I didn't say sorry yet. Don't lie and say you do forgive me.
Zim earnestly raised his voice.
My mission now is to make amends, and the last thing I want is another mission involving lies.
I do, Dib quickly assured. I know it's a lot coming from me, but I do. From what I've heard, you did more to your own planet than ours, and the Urkins still forgave you. Eventually.
Sis and Scooch did. I still get weird looks.
So it would just make sense if I did the same. Forgive you, I mean.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry.
Zim? As he apologized the third time, and as he was about to for a fourth time, Zim's voice came out pained and brittle. He shut his eyes and swallowed hard, looking as though he was about to vomit snakes. Dib awkwardly contemplated how to respond, but then he was distracted when Zib rubbed at his own face with both hands, hiding his eyes and gnawing at his lower lip. Dib wasn't thinking anymore. He didn't realize right away that he was touching Zim's shoulder until after he quietly told him, "Take it easy." Dib was never usually one to offer physical comfort. Zim was not usually one to accept it, at least as far as Dib knew before. But Zim did not squirm away like Dib had half expected. He did not ask for him to take his hand off. He said nothing for a while. When Zim showed his eyes again at last, they were squinted and weary. After another hard, slow blink, they looked to the one he used to call enemy, and he actually gave a thankful smile. Dib gave a humble one, as he crossed his arms over the railing like Zim had.
Sis likes stars,
Zim said after a minute of silence. Dib looked up at the sky with him. Oh yeah? With much more spirit than before, Zim explained.
She talks about space a lot. She likes to travel, but not for no reason like the red and purple. She goes in depth about how there's so much we're seeing right now with our eyes, but not with our hearts and curiosity.
Zim placed a hand on top of Dib's head, then pulled it back, guiding it to see the path of where his finger pointed.
She will point at any spot in the sky and say, there is a story going on there. We may be a light year away from a war or a party. Someone may have just been killed or born. Someone may be going through struggles similar to ours. And they may be pointing right back at us, wondering what our story is too.
Dib listened in awe, and did not look away when Zim released his head.
Gur eats it up like a bedtime story,
Zim said, staring ahead again.
And I do too, I think, even though Urkins do not sleep.
Thinking deeply about Sis's apparent words, Dib nodded and smiled, suddenly feeling at peace.
Would you like to join me up there once in a while and see what Sis is talking about?
Zim then said. Dip broke his gaze away from the stars and stepped back in astonishment. Zim was offering him the trip he and Gaz had so longed for. Just like that, his chances of living an exciting life again expanded rapidly. Wow,
And perhaps join me when danger comes?
Zim added with a smirk.
I know how hard you liked to fight.
While imagining the many adventures both Earth and outer space still had yet to offer him, Dib chuckled in excitement. He stepped back, turned around, threw his arms in the air, then turned back an instant later, pounding his left hand on the railing, and held out his right sideways for a handshake, which Zim accepted. You got yourself a deal, space boy. Oh, Nar. Please, my tallest. Sis perked up an eyelid at how the smaller Erkin addressed him. Quickly realizing his mistake, Nar abruptly shook his head in agitation before respectfully taking a bow. Did I say oops? My Empress. The said leader idly typed on a holographic keypad she already had open before Nar's unexpected arrival. And don't forget you can even simply address me as Sis. I promise you won't get pummeled for it. Now, about this request. A hint of annoyance was suddenly visible and audible through her calm demeanor. Nar timidly looked up at her with his head still lowered. You understand, don't you, Sis? The name nearly snagged in his throat, still not used to skipping the title name, especially the one he had grown up with. Don't you? Sis returned, slowly and sternly. Nar cringed at the intimidating tone and wiggled his fingers. Sis tapped the keypad again. A large screen appeared behind her, displaying an image of what was now known as the Time Jumper. Sis's creation, though a success, was far too dangerous to be abused, therefore strictly prohibited from unauthorized use. It remained safely in Sis's possession, locked down tight in a discreet location only she knew of. Nar was not the only one who had approached her about it, and once a group of rogue Urkins were caught searching for it in this very building. It was correct that the Time Jumper was here on Urk, but it was miles away from Sis's tower. As imagined, the Time Jumper was designed to provide access to different points in time, but only the past. When manually activated, the Time Jumper transports the handler and itself to the requested point in time and location. Before granting permission to travel, it teleports the user to Limbo, surrounding them with a simulated version of their requested time and location, requiring them to safely practice what they intend to do, without causing the destruction of something such as the space-time continuum. The Time Jumper meanwhile calculates the user's chances of survival and success. If estimates read percentages anywhere below 100, the request is denied. The one time Sis herself used it, the results read 100, but the simulation had difficulties playing back. Sis immediately had an idea why. A Florpus, a monstrous thing that bent the laws of many realities, and perhaps time as well, was a confusing location. It was the reason the damage it did to her pack seemed impossible to reverse. It had strained the first time machine she was handling when she saved the Massive, and it was straining her own time machine as well. If hers was not more durable and intelligent, it would have caused her more complications or killed her. That had been a test run, the first and only time the Time Jumper had been activated by far, and though she had built it herself, Empress Sis did not trust such a complicated device just yet, and she especially did not trust it with anyone but herself. It irritated her that Urkins like Nar had to be told why. This machine is for emergency purposes only, Sis said firmly. Actually, it's for emergencies that can be fixed, if we know for absolute certain that they are being fixed and not worsened. Tell me how you would plan to save your flavor burger from being smacked out of your hand by a rowdy Smeech without being seen by anyone, let alone your past self. What difference would it make? Nar muttered, and regretted it even before Sis jerked forward and barked in reply, her pack sparking electricity as it usually did when her emotions ran too high.
Huge! Our timeline will be seriously altered if your approach isn't done with care or precision. What you do could lead to destruction. Not to mention you could be injured.
Empress Sis faced sideways, displaying herself as an example. Her pack brain and organic brain were still wired together, as they couldn't send signals to one another normally. Erkins had gotten used to the sight of her veiny head, but it did not make her feel less ugly.
But my burger.
Nar mumbled.
I got it all the way from... With all due respect, others are going to think you're being hypocritical about what you said. About needing a leader that isn't...
Don't you go there. My situation was uncomparable to yours. I was not rescuing a damn burger, and I made sure our timeline still played out the same way. The Florpus still happened. My past self still believed Eros was destroyed in the Florpus. I still let this happen to me.
Sis jerked a thumb to her wired pack, then to her chest.
I still saved Red and Purple. Zim was still the one who killed them. We still had our arguments, and we were still led to peace. Exactly the same way, with every detail and every molecule still in place. I could have changed all of that to spare my lifespan from being cut down, but I did not. So don't even dare say that I'm being selfish. And don't you dare compare my faithful, irreplaceable Sir unit to a simple burger. Imagine how very stupidly devastating it would be if a paradox destroyed us all because of something so very easily fixable here in the present. Eros, order this pour full of flavor burger from Slugorg's Flavor Monster.
A little red and silver robot was monitoring various things through a computer across the room. He instantly responded to his master's call. He turned to her, saluted, and replied,
Yes, sir.
Sis nodded her head towards a corner, where several chairs hovered in a straight line in front of a window.
Go wait over there, Nar. Your precious burger should arrive in no later than an hour. When it does, kindly get out of my sight.
My apologies, Sis.
Nar croaked. The sheer dejection in his voice caused Sis a pang of guilt. Feeling rather sorry herself, her expression softened. She spoke less coldly.
You're forgiven, just go away so I can be angry in private.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Nar did what he was ordered, nodding and smiling thankfully. Empress Sis turned back to her keypad and tried to get back to the task she had momentarily put aside, but she instead found herself staring at the image she had pulled up. She was conflicted about her time jumper. She was right to be proud of this technology, so advanced, even for Erkins. But was she violating something by letting such a thing exist? Why would she feel as if she was, when there were other time machines? As she sighed and closed the screen, she heard a voice precious to her say from behind her,
Sir.
Sis turned to look at her standing Sir, living proof and a reminder that the time jumper was not a complete mistake. Tenderly and somberly, she answered, as she met the round scarlet eyes looking up at her.
Yes, Eros? The risk you took for me was drastic.
Eros said, concerned.
You could have been killed with me.
Sis looked away and glared in grave remembrance.
I know, but the opportunity to get you back was there. I had to take it. Eros, I couldn't stand it. Just leaving you hanging there in that time when it could have taken 3 seconds to pull you out of there, which it did. How could I not do anything about it? I had to. I just had to.
She looked at her little Sir.
I had to make a plan to rescue you. You're important to me.
Eros too looked away for a moment. Sis almost thought he was going to question her, but he looked back up and said something Sis knew no normal Sir would have said half a decade ago. The only Sir she had ever heard say this was Zim's.
I love you.
Eros said this with dignity, and with his usual blank face, but it touched the Empress's heart nonetheless. Hugs were no longer a rare thing to want as an Urkin. Just like when Sis first reunited with little Eros, she yanked him close, and her heart shot out in space.